Now I have the pleasure of introducing today's moderator, Ella Zimbalist. Ella is an initiative officer with the San Francisco Foundation's Partnership for the Bay's Future, where she's been leading work to advance equity-centered housing policies across the Bay Area for the last 2 years. She works closely with government and community partners to support collaborative, community-led housing solutions. I've had the incredible pleasure of working closely with Ella, and if you haven't met her yet, you probably will soon. She's doing sharp, impactful work and is absolutely someone to watch in the housing space. Ella, over to you.
Jordan, thank you for the warm introduction. Hi, everyone. Thrilled to be here today to facilitate this discussion and honored to introduce our panelists. First, we have Hannah Tinsley. She's a management analyst at the Housing Authority of Contra Costa, where she contributes to strategic initiatives, data-driven decision-making, and program development to support affordable housing access. She's also the former PBF Fellow supporting the Housing Authority of Contra Costa, Richmond Land, CHGC, and Richmond Art Power Coalition to advance community-led housing and economic justice efforts. Next, we have Joseph Villarreal. He is the Executive Director of the Housing Authority of Contra Costa, a role he has held for the past 18 years. HAC provides a variety of affordable housing to over 11,000 households and nearly 30,000 people. And there's some controversy to this claim, but Joseph knows the woman who invented the white chocolate macadamia nut cookie. And finally, we have Princess Robinson, the Executive Director for Richmond Land and a longtime Richmond resident and leader in the Just Transition Framework, creating and leading solutions such as environmental stewardship, cooperative development, and community land trusts. Princess is currently leading the only community land trust in West Contra Costa County. And before we kick off the conversation with our panelists, I'm going to give a brief overview of the Partnership for the Bay's Future and the goals of the North Richmond site team. Thank you for sharing screen, Jordan. Great. So 6 years ago, the Partnership for the Bay's Future was founded to address housing equity in the Bay Area. We used three main strategies. First, bringing together cross-sector leaders from the region. Second, a loan fund. This is a $500 million loan fund operated through LISC. As we near the end of our origination period, funds are still available. So if you have a project that is looking for financing, please contact LISC. And finally, the policy fund, which is the focus of today's conversation. Next slide, please. Great. Next slide. So the goal of the policy fund is to advance equitable housing policy and build community power. We utilize an inside-outside strategy, supporting government and community to work together to pass equitable housing policies. We have site teams across the Bay Area, and each site team is comprised of government entity, community partner, and fellow that is embedded with the local government and tasked with advancing shared policy goals and activating this inside-outside strategy. This is a 2-year program that is now in its 3rd cohort. And next slide, please. You can see here some of the wins that we've seen over the past 2 cohorts of the Partnership for the Bay's Future. And today we'll be talking specifically about the North Richmond site team. Next slide, please. Great. So the site team included the Housing Authority of Contra Costa, Richmond Land, CHGC, and Community Richmond Art Power Coalition as the community partners. And cohort 2, we had the fellow Hannah, who's here speaking with us today. And in the current cohort 3, our fellow is B. Coleman. We'll move to the next slide. So alongside the community partner, the Housing Authority applied for the policy fund to reposition Las Deltas, its former public housing property. Las Deltas was decommissioned in 2020, causing displacement of many residents and the loss of community's history. In the summer of 2023, the site team released its request for qualifications for developers interested in purchasing 16 sites in the Las Deltas property at below market rate. The selection panel, recruited and trained by the site team, selected 4 developers and approved the sale of all 16 sites at below market rate, plus 3 additional sites purchased at market rate by 3 of the developers. Each market rate site was sold for $1 a site, and the sales agreement included preference policy for the former residents. The HUD approval of the sales process with community-informed policies is a big success for the region and has potential to influence our other disposition processes. Another goal of the site team was documenting and preserving the history of Los Deltas. Hannah, the PBF fellow, in partnership with former residents, documented and preserved the history and stories of the former Los Deltas community members in the form of an artistic booklet and film. This effort aims to keep Los Deltas' important community history alive before the site is completely redeveloped. And we'll get into all of the details about this work with the panel. Next slide, please. So if you're interested in learning more about the PBF model, please check out our playbook. And to learn more about the evaluation and impact of the program, you can also find our program evaluation done in partnership with Informing Change on our website. Great, so now let's hear from the folks who have been on the ground advancing this work. Joseph, I'm going to start with you. And what initially motivated the Housing Authority to get involved with PBF? I'm curious what the biggest housing or land use challenges you were hoping to address in North Richmond.
Thanks, Ella. You know, the biggest challenges, I think, were what was going to happen to our property after we left, after we kind of went through our HUD process and did, you know, HUD calls it disposition, whatever sorts of disposition we were going to do. We had plans, concrete plans for taking the money and developing other affordable housing, both within North Richmond and elsewhere in the county. And that went well, but we were about 20% of the housing stock in North Richmond. So what was going to happen? And we had some initial ideas from talking to a handful of community groups, not as broad a group as what we ended up working with through the PBF program. But the big question was, where was the funding going to come from? Where was the organization going to come from? You know, et cetera, et cetera. So we had been working a little bit with Richmond Land prior to the PBF program, and it was kind of a little bit bumpy at times. You know, sometimes we're on the same page, sometimes not. But we had an ongoing dialogue with them, and Valerie Jameson in particular, who was their executive director when we started working with Richmond Land, and Richmond Land was aware of this program, the PBF program. We were not. And I think despite our name, we're actually not part of the county. We're an independent entity. So Valerie and Richmond Land had reached out to the county to try to partner with them and to move what they were trying to work on in North Richmond together. And the county wasn't able to do it for whatever reason. So Valerie turned to us. And I think for me, you know, again, we had a relationship with Richmond Land, so we were willing to partner with them. But also this program, you know, just at first glance, seemed to give us the possibility of some future resources, some future organization, some future, you know, kind of long-term partnership with the community after we left. I mean, we're going to keep a foot in there, but once we don't have housing, like a lot of our leverage and a lot of our resources go away. So we wanted something for the long term, and that's what led us to this.
Really, thank you, Joseph. And so Princess, Joseph alluded to this a little bit, but you know, challenging at times relationship between community partners and the housing authority. And so I'm curious, Richmond Land has been deeply rooted in the North Richmond community. And I'm curious how the partnership with the Housing Authority began and what it looked like to build trust and align around the shared vision for redevelopment.
Thank you, Hannah. Yeah, so as you said, Richmond Land is the first community land trust in West Contra Costa County. And so we are really using this model to remove land and property from the market and create community controlled assets permanently. And we rely heavily on our members to really guide the mission and vision of our organization. So we're cultivating the importance of community land trust, community-led development, and co-stewarding community-controlled assets. So by moving into land and, you know, housing into collective ownership, member governance, and securing it for multi-generational benefit and affordability, we shift how we are able to care for land and each other, right? So through the CLT model, we were able to advance a community-driven development project called the North Richmond Eco Village. The idea came from community leaders in a fellowship at the time in Richmond Land, and and also known barriers of low-income residents having little access to affordable housing and stable home ownership opportunities. And as a North Richmond resident at the time, there were not only, you know, a lot of vacant county and city lots, but the Los Deltas project-based housing was going up for sale. So we used the Eco Village vision to build a conceptual design specifically for two of the sites that are formerly owned by the Housing Authority, where we hope to bring to North Richmond 16 to 22 small units with community amenities for permanent community ownership. So this vision that we had just as community members in the neighborhood, it initiated a conversation about how do we turn our vision into reality. And because we're a new land trust, we didn't have the available resources. So I remember our first meeting where we met with the county supervisor. We met with Housing Authority, Contra Costa Housing Authority's directors, the planning department, right, other stakeholders, to really present them our project, our vision. And each of these folks played an important role because they had to go back and advocate for this vision as well. So these conversations led to meetings. These meetings led to finding resources, and that ultimately created space for us to come together and create a unique, equitable disposition process for community members and organizations to be involved and prioritized in these properties throughout North Richmond. So I believe the PBF space supported the goal of the below market rate sales to local organizations and local developers, as well as the implementation of the local preference and just right to return policy that really prioritizes former residents, natives, current North Richmond residents to come back and become homeowners and and own something in their neighborhood, which is very important. But most importantly, it created a space for us to be in communication with each other, for us to build that capacity and relationship building and trust amongst each other to support the ideas and the vision from our community.
Thank you, Princess. As really beautiful grounding of the work and the goals of the CLT model. Hannah, you were the Policy Fund Fellow working on the initiative during the prior cohort, and now you've continued the work by joining the HAC team. I'm curious to hear from you, what were some of the early goals of the site team? And you're at the heart of this inside-outside strategy that we've mentioned, and navigating the complexity of working across community and government perspectives. Can you speak to how you navigated some of those complexities and what that looked like in your role?
Totally. Yeah, so when I was starting the fellowship, pretty much the first thing that was assigned to me was to help the Housing Authority write that request for qualifications, or RFQ, where we would be offering those 16 former Los Deltas sites to developers for $1 each. So essentially giving away the sites, and we wanted to select which developers were gonna buy them and redevelop them as homeownership opportunities. And the main goal for me in writing that was to make sure that that document reflected years of community engagement that had happened to date. Princess had mentioned some of it that Richmond Land had been working on. There were also other community-driven documents and visions that had a lot of stakeholder involvement and community buy-in, such as the North Richmond Quality of Life Plan and a couple others. So those were kind of where I was basing my kind of onboarding, and then also how to embed the community goals into our RFQ. And so out of those ideas, and then also some ideas that Joseph and HAC had on their own, our goals that we were embedding into that RFQ were prioritizing that local preference policy, not only for former Los Deltas residents to be able to return to the site if they want to as homeowners, but also for anyone who currently lived or worked in North Richmond, or anyone who had been displaced from North Richmond for any other reason. We also were prioritizing local developers in this project. So in our scoring criteria, we built in extra points for developers who could demonstrate that they have either community roots in North Richmond, or they provide, services locally and they have that existing relationship in the community, which is something that was really important to North Richmond residents, given that Los Deltas had made up such a huge part of their community. They wanted someone who was familiar with those sites and kind of the culture and history of North Richmond to redevelop it. And then to your point on kind of navigating that complexity, I think it was a little tough at first, mainly because of just one issue we had, which was that Richmond Land and Community Housing Development Corporation, or CHDC, they were planning to compete for the land and try to purchase those sites for $1 from us. So we couldn't allow them really to shape the RFQ directly because that would give them the unfair advantage. So it was a little, frustrating at first because transparency was difficult due to that reason. And it was such a critical time early on in our site team to build that trust. So my goal was really to make sure that the community goals, both from our community partners and from those documents I mentioned, were honored in that RFQ, even when we couldn't be getting direct input from our community partners. So kind of advocating for transparency within the limits of fair competition. But that was just the first, a couple of months. And then once the RFQ was public, we could really directly collaborate again, which really opened up and continued to help us build trust.
It's fascinating to hear not only the trust building between government and community partners and working across difference, but also how that had to happen between community partners with different visions and priorities. So one of the major goals of your site team was to ensure that the redevelopment of the former Los Deltas public housing site would center long-term residents and community priorities. And you've spoken a little bit, Hannah, to how you embedded community voice in the RFQ process and through the preference policy. But I'm curious, Joseph or Princess, if you have anything to add about how you work together to embed community voice into the planning and disposition process.
Well, I think the interesting thing from the housing authority perspective, and one of the things that I'm not gonna say learned, because it wasn't like I didn't know it, but kind of exercise more, you exercise the muscle more so it gets better. Housing authorities, we speak to our community is the residents who live at Los Deltas, our public housing tenants. And so we speak to them a lot. And we'd been speaking to them for years before I even came as the executive director here about plans we had at Los Deltas. We don't speak to the broader community as much. Every housing authority is different, but in general, I think we're all kind of like that. And so one of the things for me was being brought into the broader community conversation. And it's interesting, not only, and it made sense given our goals, which were we wanted something stable and we wanted something good left behind, but also even on the community side, like I would go to meetings and I would hear about affordable housing, but then I would realize, like, for many of the groups, I think Richmond Land reaches to some of our clients. They have a broader reach than some of the community groups we're going to work with, but their vision of affordable housing was significantly higher than like our natural tenant on the public housing program could afford. So I think it was, for me, a good learning lesson in ways to work with the community, ways to both educate the community about what we're up to, and just have more of that give and take conversation with more than just our public housing tenants. And we have like 11 more projects to go. So I think it'll be a good long-term lesson for me. Princess, I don't know, you got anything to add?
Yeah, I definitely do. I think it's important to start about the history, right, of North Richmond. So North Richmond was the only place that Black people could purchase homes historically. And this community is also surrounded by industrial businesses, a refinery, and it is also next to two creeks that drain out to the bay and historically would flood the neighborhood. But because North Richmond has such a rich history of environmental stewardship, of community organizing, jazz music, annual events, small businesses, right? decades, it's been over a decade of community members coming together and depending on each other to improve the quality of life in this small but mighty unincorporated area in the Bay Area. So the Los Deltas projects is scattered throughout the neighborhood. And so there's a familiar face that was in the neighborhood that is now gone. And for a very long time, community members have been voicing and advocating about the challenges and needs of the community through countless studies and engagement surveys. And now we just believe it's time to put it in motion, right? So I think our priority coming into the space was always to figure out how we could bring folks back to the neighborhood and preserve the culture.
Yeah, and I can just also add, I think that was what Joseph and Princess spoke to, was kind of that larger community engagement. We did, like Joseph mentioned, speak a lot to the people who actually lived at Los Deltas, who may or may not still be part of the North Richmond community. A lot of them live somewhere else right now. So I spent a lot of my time in the first 6 months of the fellowship just kind of getting to know as many of those displaced residents as I could. You know, I would call them, text them, email them, send them direct mail, whatever worked best for them, to make sure I was getting them the information they need, keeping them updated, and then also gathering their input on the process. So, you know, I would ask them directly to try to understand what kind of design features, services, supports, or things like that they need in order to be able to return, and then using that feedback to shape the RFQ. And then once the developers were selected, using that feedback to kind of reinforce with the developers what those people who should be benefiting from the local preference policy are prioritizing.
Thank you, Hannah. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about, you just described really deep community engagement work leading and shaping the RFQ process. And so this work has required not just cross-sector collaboration, but this long-term and power sharing mindset. And I'm curious to hear what you all have learned from this approach and if it's influenced your work broader and beyond this initiative. And Hannah, curious specifically from your perspective of going from the position of being a PBF fellow and doing this incredibly engaged and community-based work, and how that's influenced your new position and approach with the Housing Authority.
Yeah. So one of the things I was drawn to with Partnership for the Bay's Future was, you know, getting some exposure to working in the public sector. I had worked nonprofits, private sector, academia before, but I hadn't actually worked in government. So I really loved that PBF could kind of allow me to try that out in a unique model. And I think I'm really glad that I ended up here. And some of the things that have really shaped the way I'm looking at my role is that true community partnership requires more than just the outreach. It really is that sustained power sharing mindset, like you said, Ella. So we weren't just, you know, asking people what they wanted. We were really trying to build those systems that could reflect and respond to those needs. And a lot of times that was uncomfortable or complicated because those type of systems don't necessarily exist. And we had to think outside the box to kind of come up with something, partner with different organizations that we hadn't worked with before, to try to have them help us come up with something. So that's kind of how I'm approaching my work now. And it's just really made me more conscious of like who's in the room when we're making decisions, who's missing, and then how to really build trust with the people who have been missing up to this point.
Yeah, and I think from the Housing Authority's perspective, you know, again, it was interesting having a broader conversation than we normally have, because we are used to speaking to our tenants, and, you know, if we do anything that we're seeking HUD approval for, we have to document that we talked to them, we document what their concerns were, that we took them into account. And again, we're just not as used to doing that with the broader community. So I think one of the things that we got out of the PBF process was you know, I talked about the fact that Hannah was a diplomat for a long time. I think that we all came with different perspectives. We were all a little bit prickly. You know, as you mentioned, Ella, the nonprofits weren't all on the same page. They have very different visions for the future. You know, some are more about individual equity building. You can hear Princess, they're more for a collective, you know, holding of land and approach. So I think a lot of what we got out of it was, you know, like I said, not only learning how to kind of use these muscles in these broader community conversations, but it was a place for all of us where there was a level of trust that Hannah brought and through PBF brought, that we could all kind of iron out some of our differences, and work together and learn, and I think part of it is not only did we flex, we adapt a little bit to what the collective wanted, but each of the individual nonprofit partners did as well. And I think that was a super valuable part of participating in the PBF process for all of us.
Yeah,
Princess.
plus Joseph and Hannah for sure. I think the relationship building was very important. We all coming from different backgrounds, right? Coming from different perspectives. And so being all in one room and being able to voice those differences were very important. And housing authorities seeing they heard what was important to us, right? They also heard what was important to other organizations as well as community members. So heard in a crowd, heard in a whole bunch of people is a lot of work. So definitely appreciated Hannah for sure during that process. Specifically, challenges for Richmond Land at this time was because our vision for the North Richmond Eco Village project would essentially replace single family duplexes on those sites, and it would bring 16 to 22 units, which required more density. The zoning at the time didn't allow it, but it was a perfect time for us because at that same time, the county was doing community engagement for the general plan 2040. And it was taking place, and we were able to advocate for the rezoning of those sites. Another challenge for Richmond Land is financial resources to support a community land trust model. There's not a lot of financial products out there that support our model and our vision for community ownership and with housing and land. Also, right, we are trying to build a project, the Eco Village, we're trying to build a project that can serve 30 to 50% AMI. Folks that are actually living in these projects, how are they going to be able to afford to purchase these homes, right? So also a challenge in building out this project, as well as providing the technical assistance needed to prepare residents for home ownership as well. So those are some, challenges, and we're still, navigating them.
Absolutely.
And let me just jump in, because one of the things that's interesting about still navigating them is that the zoning that worked for Richmond Land and that the group all supported now does not work for one of our other partners, and so who were just awarded some other parts of our land. So that's something we have to work through as well. So, but again, going back to this process, kept us all together. We moved it forward. We got Richmond Land what they needed. Now we're going to try to get this group what they need now.
So Joseph and Princess, you spoke to partnership as being a key part to moving through challenges that came up in this process. I'm curious if you have any other thoughts on some of the challenges that your team faced, whether political, structural, or relational, and how you've navigated and moved through those.
I think for me, and I think and just hearing like other government partners in going through the various meetings at PBF, a lot of people, a lot of advocates, a lot of nonprofit groups who maybe don't work with government as much approach government as kind of almost like the enemy, as an obstacle, as a roadblock. And part of the tension we have with Richmond Land, Richmond Land's trying to create something that doesn't exist. Richmond Land's trying to create something that's hard to create. So they face a lot of obstacles. So they're, so that makes you more aggressive anyway, to try to make something happen that doesn't exist and that you're getting told no, no, no over and over again. But our initial contact with them, they never spoke to us, and they're kind of doing all this other stuff in community. And they weren't the only community partner. Like, I don't want to single out Richmond Land other than they're still in the conversation with us. So I think on the government side, it's like, come talk to us. No, you may get told no, you may get told a whole different vision. You may get people obstruct you. Okay, then you have to deal with that. But I think one of the things, like, we all in our group, I think, despite all the tension, like, part of the reason we're all still here, part of the reason our project moved forward is we all share a pretty similar vision. Now, my vision, frankly, included probably two of our community partners in terms of the kind of projects they're doing, a little bit more traditional home ownership kind of things, might be affordable, but it's more traditional. My vision did not include Richmond Land's, what they're trying to do, but they educated me. I learned about it. It perfectly lines up with our, what we're trying to do. I think what we're trying to do lines up with a lot of what Richmond Land's trying to do. So I would say from the government perspective, like, at least try to talk to us before you hit us over the head. Now, you still may need to hit us over the head, but at least try to talk to us first.
Yeah, and I would just
I love that.
say, sorry, and I would just say, plus to Joseph, I don't have much to say after that, but I would just say that being in relationship with those public agencies are very important, because it's like it just provides a softer way to move through these no's that we keep getting, right? And like, people are willing to help and support us through. So those relationships are very important, especially to community organizations.
Well, somewhere it needs to be on the plaque. You might need to hit us over the head, but at least talk to us first. As if you all could offer one piece of advice to other local governments and CBOs looking to co-create housing policy in a deeply collaborative way, what would it be?
I can jump in first here. I think I would say to start building those relationships before you even need them. I think kind of the common way that most governments and CBOs might go about is to start connecting when there's some sort of deadline or some funding opportunity, or something's at stake. But I think that the real true collaboration kind of thrives on trust, and trust takes time to build. So if you can start getting to know, the different community organizations in your community, if you're the government, before you need them or before they need you, and building those relationships early, I think that goes a long way. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is just, there was a lot of time, we had a lot of meetings, so many meetings all the time. And sometimes I would think, it might be a good time to cancel a meeting. The agenda's late, give people some time back. But there were so many times when I didn't cancel the meeting. We're like, let's just keep it quick, do a quick, progress report, informal check-in, 5-10 minutes. When those type of meetings ended up in some great idea that I wouldn't have thought of otherwise. And I think just that back and forth of sharing things out loud, what you're working on, what you're thinking about, can really go a long way, as opposed to doing everything through email. So yeah, another, just work on the relationships and make sure you're meeting regularly and talking to each other.
There was research a few years ago that came out that it was focused on emotional and romantic relationships. And it talked about how you could kind of speed up the relationship by jumping to questions you would normally not get if you were dating, like, for a year or 2 years later. And I think PBF was kind of like that. I mean, along the lines of what Hannah was saying, like, we had a lot more meetings than we would normally do. So even though we left a meeting like really mad, oh my God, I remember an early meeting where like 9 out of the 12 people on the call were ready to kill me at the end of the meeting, but we had to meet again in like 3 days later because of PBF. So I think the fact that, and again, I mean, we were fortunate, like, we were all trying to accomplish the same thing. We were not trying to accomplish opposite things. So, I mean, that's part of it. But the fact that we had to keep meeting and keep meeting and keep meeting, and I'm somebody who doesn't always love meetings, so I was rolling my eyes sometimes, but I do think that time together was a huge part of it. I mean, it just is. You have to spend time with each other and talk things through.
Princess, anything to add?
Yeah, y'all couldn't have said it, any better, Joseph and Hannah. I think my only offer of advice would be, The answer no and can't is just not an option, right? We keep figuring out ways to move forward, continue to ground in the vision. It is very important to keep reminding yourself of the why. And from during this process, for me, it is because land is liberation, right? Permanent, affordable housing for everyone is a priority for me. And I would say if you have a vision or an idea that will improve your life and the people around you, please advocate for it, because you never know if there's a solution that already exists or a pathway that you can create.
As always, Princess, inspiring a call to action and a good place to transition to Q&A. So please put your questions in the question and answer box if any come up. Here are some that we've already gotten from the audience. First, how do you view the state level push for more house building quotas? Are these directly helpful or more orthogonal to the affordability problems you are addressing?
I'm somebody who believes housing supply is the key. Like, we need more, 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 more. Now, nobody, I don't care what side of the political spectrum you're on, nobody wants their more housing built beside them, but that's what we need. And I will say in this, oh, you go, Princess.
I was just going to say, like, of course, we want more housing, right? But we also want to pay attention of the process to get more housing. If it's more private developers coming in to purchase these assets and doing what they want, that's not beneficial to the community, right? So you know, I'm on the fence about it, because yes, we need more housing, but also we need to be more involved in the process of that process.
Yeah, and I'd say we do try our best to collaborate and work with the county on their RENA goals in this process. So we looked at, the goals that they had for how much housing they wanted to build on each of our sites, because those were part of their RENA numbers. And we took that into account when we were looking at the proposals for specifically the main campus, which is an 11.5-acre large site that was completely demolished. So it's going to be completely new housing. And when we were looking at the proposals, one of the scoring criteria was, does it meet the county's RENA goal? And so I think, but we were trying to take that in context too. Like, if it was way too much, if it was over the goal and it wasn't making sense, we were discussing that as the selection panel. So it depends, like Princess said, but for the most part, yeah, we do try to work with those goals.
Thank you. And the next question, what are the best ways that donors from other communities in the Bay Area help you, as well as, or can help you, as well as affordability and housing equity issues across the Bay Area? I can take a stab at this one too.
You want to go first, Ella, and then I can maybe jump in.
Well, I would plug to reach out to us at the PBF team. We're working towards doing our fourth cohort of PBF, and we're engaged in bringing together leaders from across the Bay Area and building a regional approach to the housing crisis. So I think Jordan can put some of our emails in the chat, but please reach out to us if you're interested in engaging more deeply in this regional cross-sector partnership. Joseph, go ahead.
And I would back that up. Well, so one of the things that I grew more appreciative of in this process. I mean, again, I'm always focused on units, and I want like hard money and things like that. But through this process, I mean, the PBF provided us a space, as we talked about, to all work together, but it also kind of broadened the things we were doing. I mean, like Hannah mentioned the histories of our former residents and some of the other pieces that we did. That was funded by additional funding, PBF program and San Francisco Foundation and Coro. I know that Richmond Land has done a lot of community work that is related to the building of the units and to their future projects, but is more about like educating the community, binding the community, lifting the community up. So I found a lot of value in that. But going back to just the units, I mean, everybody who does this work knows you have to find sources from 10, 20 different places. Like, it is crazy. So it's just a natural part of this work that, and we're fortunate. I mean, there's not enough money to do the work we need, but there are a lot of groups like the ones in PBF that in the Bay Area. I mean, this is one of the better areas to do this work in the country.
Exactly. There is not a lot of resources and donors and funds out there that the CLT model can take advantage of. But we're always advocating, right? And there's a lot of support out there. There's many coalitions, many CLTs across California that we can depend on and that can support us. And as a small CLT, we haven't went after large federal funding yet. So, wish us luck as we do move into that very soon.
Thank you, Princess. Hannah, anything to add on this question, or we can move on to the next?
No, I think that covered it.
The next audience question is, are you guys planning to provide any incentives for community members on pricing who are looking to purchase the land that are not purchased by the nonprofit?
Oh, so for the housing authority, so there's a mix. So we're trying. So let's go back to the beginning. Ella, you had mentioned that we were selling these below market. Our initial permission from HUD was actually to sell everything at market rate. And the reason for that is that HUD wants us to take that money and go fix the rest of our public housing, replace our public housing, build new affordable housing, et cetera. So one of the things that we did as part of this process, both with the PBF and kind of beyond the PBF, is that we've segmented this property because it is a main campus of about 12 acres. And then there's like 80 scattered sites and like another 8 acres throughout North Richmond. So the part that in particular that we focused on with PBF and with Princess, et cetera, was the 16 buildings that are going to be turned, the nonprofits are bought for $1. So we had to get special permission from HUD. That was all part of this PBF process. But what they all have promised to do, and we have contracts with them binding them to this, but this is their mission, so they will deliver regardless. But what they promised to do is they are focusing, and we, again, got special permission from HUD on local residents first, former Los Deltas residents first, local North Richmond residents second, and then other people after that. But they will all provide affordable housing. They have different models. I mean, again, that we talked about some of the internal conflict with our groups. They're not all doing the exact same type of affordable housing. They're very different. I would say that Richmond Land will probably reach the broadest range of affordability. The others will be a little bit higher to varying degrees. The main campus that we just went out for RFP, we're going to our board for approval next week, will have a mix of affordable senior housing and some like moderate level market, well, not market rate housing, moderate level home ownership opportunities. And then the remainder of the properties we're selling at market, and we'll use that to fix up other things. And I will say, before the PBF program, we actually took our money from North Richmond and we helped fund 10 different tax credit properties. We do that through project-based vouchers. We actually have already replaced more units than we took down. And I think our commitments overall are like, I don't know, can't remember, but it's over 100 million over 40 years. So we have a significant commitment. So I think overall we've increased the affordable housing supply, and that will be part both in North Richmond and outside of North Richmond.
Yeah, and just to kind of paint a better picture for the amount of housing, the 16 sites that we sold for $1, most of them are duplexes. So that's already 32 units that are going to be restricted affordable. And then Richmond Land is actually knocking down 5 of them and replacing it with like about 20, up to 22 units. So there'll be a lot of different affordable types of home ownership opportunities through that process. And then the market rate sites, we have a lot of them left, I think 20 something. Again, mostly duplexes. Some of them even have 4 or 5 units on a property. So we're doing what we can to make it possible for community members to purchase those. They are not in great shape. They've been vacant for a long time. They're very old structures to begin with. So they need, repair in order to be habitable. So it's been a challenge finding financing for individual families to purchase those on their own, which is why we went with the phase one, where we sell to developers who can fix them up and then resell them at an affordable price to community members. But there is that possibility for them to buy directly from us in this market rate if they are able to find a loan that includes the rehab. And we have our current fellow B who is working on, different financing models, finding different partnerships with banks and lenders and realtors who can help guide people through that process. So that's something we're currently working on, is trying to make that as possible as we can for community members to get this. And we're really trying to avoid the market rate units going to like outside investors or people who are not from the community. So the local preference policy does apply, even though it's a bit more of a challenge to make sure those end up in community hands.
And I want to say the first market rate sale went to Richmond Land, who wanted to expand the footprint of what they were able to get at the dollar sales. And the second that we're approving right now went to a young man who actually grew up in our public housing and is now buying it at market rate. So that was kind of cool.
Thank you. So you all mentioned this a little bit, but can you put a finer point on how long-term North Richmond residents can buy homes? And I think this question will vary, but what is the cost that you can predict associated with those homes?
And I don't know if you have the link to just put in the chat to people can sign up for our list. So we have an ongoing list. It will vary, as you said, Ella, depending on the developer. Some of the units, the affordable ones, are coming up like literally within the next few months. Some will be years down the road. So I think the best thing would be to get on our mailing list, and we'll send you information continuously as it comes up.
Thank you. And is there any concern that with the current administration, HUD might decide that the local occupancy preferences are kind of DEI?
100%. So, and I've said this a few times in our meeting, like and I've spoken about this around the country, like we were given a local preference that literally nobody else has been given. And I'm talking back under the Biden administration, much less the current administration. And some much larger, much more politically powerful jurisdictions tried to do what we were given permission to do. And we're not only not given it, but we're repeatedly not given it, or we're given some watered down version. So I've never gone back to HUD because I don't want them to think about it again. I've never gone back to HUD to ask them. Someday I will, but for now, we're happy with the preference. We just want to keep it and move on. But I will say this, it's not, I mean, the neighborhood is the neighborhood, but it's not an explicitly DEI preference. It's a preference for the neighborhood. And I do think this is a tool, getting to the bigger picture. I mean, this is a tool that HUD should use more. I mean, and many of you know who follow this, like public housing is being redeveloped around the country, torn down, and it's typical that the people in the neighborhood get displaced and don't get the chance to come back. I will tell you, North Richmond was unusual. Our public housing was unusual in that more of our tenants wanted to move than stay. That's not the norm. But some wanted to stay. They should be given the, if you want to move, I think that's perfectly fine if we can figure out how to make it work out for you, which we did in this case. But you shouldn't be forced to move. And so I think this preference is not, on paper, a DI preference. I think it's a preference that regardless of the racial or socioeconomic demographics of a neighborhood, people should not be displaced if they don't want to be.
Princess, I saw you snapping along there. Anything to add?
Nope. I love the way Joseph said it. It's just the right thing to do.
And so you all have agreed, and we talked a bit about your work in the second cohort and ongoing, but you all signed up to do this again in our current cohort of PBF. Can you speak in our last just 2 minutes quickly about where the work is now and what you're excited about over the next few years in this current PBF cohort?
I can briefly start us off. We are currently, Richmond Land is currently in escrow for the 2 sites, so we're about to gain site control. That's very exciting for us. We have been working together to collaborate on how to really get the community involved and engaged in these processes. So we've been talking about hosting a large community event with other community members so that we can all come together and provide maybe a housing resource fair or something, and let all the community know that we're here and we're redeveloping and please get involved. Also, we're working with the fellow now to find resources to really put folks in positions, because positions to purchase homes. And that's through either housing counseling from other organizations. Like, how can we bring our services together to collaborate more, to really, provide the needed hands, holding, right, for community members to prepare in order to purchase these homes. It's not just, yes, the policies are great that we implemented in place. Yes, like we have a vision, overall vision, we're putting the community first, but it's also about like this community has a long history of being neglected, right? Being neglected and not having those resources in our community. And so now it's just like we also still need to provide, some technical assistance to residents so that they can prepare.
Totally, yeah. I'm just glad that we're kind of going into the more implementation phase. This process has been going on for a long time, much longer than I was involved. I think I got involved kind of at the tail end of it, and even that was 3 years ago now. And so now we're finally at the point where the properties are in escrow, being closed, being transferred to new developers. They're working on their entitlements, and it's just feeling a little bit more tangible. When before it was a lot of policy brainstorming, thinking. Like Princess said, there has been so many different surveys and studies on North Richmond, and so now we're really in that implementation phase of making it happen.
And I will say this is, going back to why I agreed to do this as the housing authority. This is why. I mean, this is where, the work we do is hard. The work ahead is harder. And it gets back to what Princess was alluding to, the resources. I came here from Oakland and Alameda County, and our housing needs are pretty similar here. The cost to build affordable housing is similar, but the money is dramatically different. And again, they don't have enough money, but we definitely don't have enough money in Contra Costa, and North Richmond even less so. So this is where the long-term resources, the long-term support, the long-term group effort, this is exactly, why I signed up for, agreed to have the housing authority participate in the PBF process. And, again, it's been tremendously helpful, and I think it will continue to be, and we're looking forward to it.
Right. Well, we're at time, so I want to offer a huge gratitude to our panelists. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and experience with us today. Thank you all for attending, and thank you to EBHO for co-hosting this with us. And I'll pass it to Jordan to close this out.
Yeah, I'm just going to echo your thoughts. Thank you so much, all of you, for such a thoughtful and powerful conversation. And thanks to everyone for joining us. And just a reminder, if you want to stay connected with PBF and check out the resources that Ella mentioned at the beginning, you can visit us at baysfuture.org. And you can sign up there to receive any of our updates about future events and news from PBF. Take care, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.